About 6 years ago, something happened to me while I was home alone that I'll never forget. Because of this, I had to get therapy for 5 months straight, and this is why I will never stay home alone again. I was 12 years old at the time of this story, and this took place in my hometown in Weymouth, Massachusetts. It's a very small town, as there was nothing to do, and the antique design of the town made it look also boring and old. One weekend, my mom had told me that she had recently gotten a call back from a job that she applied to, and that she had to go into Boston for an interview. She trusted me to watch over the house for a few hours while she was gone. With me being only 12, she went over the rules most parents tell their children when being left alone. Don't go outside, don't answer the door for anybody, etc. She then left in a hurry, and I had the house to myself for a few hours until she got back. With nothing to really do or anywhere to go, I simply threw myself onto my bed and flipped on my TV to the cartoons. About an hour later, I go downstairs while on my way to the kitchen, and I notice somebody standing in our backyard. He was facing off in the opposite direction with both of his hands in his pockets as if he were waiting for the bus. At first, I didn't get too worried as a few men had been coming by to fix a pipe on the side of the house that had a major leak. However, this guy looked nothing like a plumber or anyone who specializes in repairing pipes for that matter. He wore a black long-sleeved shirt, black pants, and a gray hoodie that surely covered most of his face. I don't even remember thinking twice about it. Anyway, I had went back upstairs and finished up my TV shows and decided to go take a shower as I had a birthday to go to later that night. I turn on the shower and go in for about 15 minutes. I take really long showers, so whenever I'm home alone, I go mental. After I was done, I turned off the water, and that's when I hear the front door open. My first thought was that it was my mom finally home from her interview, so I shoot her a text asking if she was home, and within a minute, she replies with, "Hey honey, I just got finished with the interview. I'm driving home now. Is everything okay?" That's when I get a sharp pain into the pit of my stomach, knowing that someone was in my house, and it wasn't my mom. Why my dad isn't home is another story, but I take a deep breath to compose myself and wrap a towel around me and slowly creep down the steps and try and see who it was. Looking back, that was probably the most stupidest decision of my life. As I reached the bottom step, I peeked around the corner and felt my blood run cold. There was a man, about 6'6", and looked to be in his mid-30s, standing in my kitchen. He was holding a large wrench in his hand and was looking directly at me as if he knew I was coming down the stairs. Then, very quietly, he said 5 words that still haunt me till this day. "Run while you still can." That's when I lost it and started screaming while running up the stairs and into my room while locking the door. All the while, I began hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping at my door. I knew he was there because I could see the outlines of his shoes at the bottom of the door frame. He began banging on the door loudly with a wrench, demanding me to let him in. At this point, calling the police wasn't an option, so I did the only thing I could do. I slowly opened my window and jumped out onto the patio floor. Even though I tried to break my fall, I still landed with some minor injuries. I felt as if 1,000 pounds had been lifted off of me when I see my mom's car pull into the driveway. I run crying to her, explaining the situation, and she immediately takes out her .45 she keeps in her purse and walks into the house. I'd like to mention that my mom had served 3 years in the military, so she knew what she was doing. I heard 2 very loud gunshots from inside my room, followed by yelling and screaming. Police had been called by my neighbors, who apparently had heard the gunshots, and police then took this nightmare guy away. The look the man gave me as he was forced into the backseat of the police car was something that I'd never forget. It was a look of pure hatred and anger, like the first thing he would do once he got out of jail would be to come back for me. We had since moved out of that house a month later due to the constant paranoia I was having, which eventually made me have mental therapy as previously mentioned before. I don't know what the man's intentions were, but if he had a wrench with him, chances are he was probably planning on doing a lot more than just robbing us.
So this happened to me on Thursday, April 25th, and I still can't shake off how terrifying and strange it was. To cut to the chase, I was home alone, getting ready for my 12 o'clock college class that morning when I opened my blinds to let some natural light in. I glanced out my window to see a man in his mid-30s wearing a baseball cap roaming around my property, with his hands on his hips, walking with a lot of weird confidence. Our yard is kind of like a cliff and looks over onto our 5 acres of property down below. I live in the PNW, so it's a pretty scenic view. I was really confused and thought maybe it was a worker that my mum had hired for our renovations on the house, admiring the view. I'm a little uncomfortable at this point, because the dude walks to the side of my house, out of sight. I head upstairs to see him now roaming around my front yard and my driveway, looking at things, checking out the house, etc. He still hasn't seen me at this point. I call my dad and ask him if we've hired anyone to come by the house, and he says not that he knows of, and tells me he's going to call my mum and ask her, and then call me back. I'm waiting for the call when I notice this strange dude's car. It's a white Honda with no license plates, just parked parallel to my front door. The dude still hasn't seen me, and he's still wandering around, so I take this as an opportunity to remember we have a security system, and I armed it. So if he did try to break in, it would immediately alert the police. If this was some sort of professional or worker, he would have rang my doorbell or knocked at least once. He did neither. Just then, I get a call back from my dad saying neither him or my mum hired anyone to come by today, and that I need to call our local police station immediately. I went back downstairs after making sure to lock every door and window upstairs, and called my city's police station. I explained to the woman on the other end what was happening, and she decides that she's not going to send an officer out, and instead gives me a number to call their emergency dispatch line, and told me to talk to them. I call the number she gave me, and immediately I get an automated message saying, "Thank you for calling," my town's name, "non-emergency hotline. Nobody is available to take your call right now. If this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. At this point, I'm really irritated, because 15 minutes has passed and this weird dude is still lurking around my house while I'm home, and apparently that wasn't enough to warrant an emergency to the lady I called at my local police department. I hung up and decided to call 911. After getting in touch with the 911 operator, I was asked a series of questions about his appearance before they would even alert officers near me to start heading towards my house. The whole thing seemed really weird. Nobody was in a hurry to have officers come up to my place, when I was a younger girl home alone with a strange dude. I asked the officer if I could stay on the line with her, when she finally, after what seemed like forever, alerted the police to come to where I was. And she agreed, and I went back upstairs to check on the weird guy. And he's now sitting in his unplated Honda, either listening to the radio show extremely loudly, or on a phone call with someone through his car. It was a very prominent, loud male voice coming from his car. Then all of a sudden, I hear the tone you hear when someone hangs up on you, and the operator was no longer on the line. I was really confused when my thoughts were interrupted by an unrecognized phone number calling me. I assumed it was the operator calling me back, so I picked it up. Instead, I was greeted by really creepy, heavy breathing. I'm not sure whose it was, but it really freaked me out. I hung up immediately and dialed back 911. I'd been pretty calm up to this point, but that phone call put me in panic mode. I got on the phone with another operator who already knew my situation and address before I could even explain it to her. She said the cops were on their way. 20 minutes had passed at this point. The dude is still here in his car, and the cops aren't. Keep in mind I live in a smaller town, so there's no reason why it took the cops as long as it did to come down. Finally, this dude is leaving my driveway, just as the cops pull in, and they stop him and ask him a few questions. A cop then comes up to my door and hands me a sketchy-looking flyer saying it was just a landscaper. He said he had an appointment. I was really relieved and irritated that it was just a dude my mum had hired, until I realized it wasn't. I called my mum back and said the cop said it was just a landscaper that you hired, and that he had an appointment. And my mum replies with, "I can assure you, we never hired a landscaper." we don't even need one.
My name is Danny, and this happened to me when I was living with my dad at the time of this story. My dad worked 2 jobs, and I was only 18 at the time and was a part-time college student, so my dad would oftentimes be called into work while I was either at home or school. This particular night, my dad had been called into work for one of his jobs for a possible storm emergency and wouldn't be back until the next day. This was during hurricane season, so him getting called into work wasn't too big of a surprise. Anyway, my dad had already left for work and I was laying on the couch watching a movie while somewhat enjoying the sound of rain and thunder from outside. At one point during the movie, I for some reason fell asleep and woke up to the sound of the home phone ringing. This wasn't too sketchy as we get calls almost every day. Most of the time either from scammers or people looking for my dad through his work. I hesitated and got up to answer the phone and said hello, still in my drowsy state. However, the only thing I heard was a slight static from the other end of the line. The rest was just silence. Just as I was about to hang up the phone, I then heard what sounded like faint crying. I said hello one more time into the phone, and this time I got a response. There was a girl on the other end that sounded around 5 or 6 judging by her voice. She sounded distressed and scared. Then, clear as day, I heard these exact words. "Help me. I've been taken. I've been missing for 3 years." I told her to stay on the line with me and then I dialed 911 from my iPhone. All I told the operator was just to listen. I asked the girl where she was located, but with her being so young, she could only describe the house to be small and white. She explained that she was in a dark room left alone. All of a sudden, the sound of a door opening with force broke the silence and the girl began to scream before hanging up. The operator took down every little detail she tried giving us and thanked me for informing her. All the while, I was texting my dad about the situation and he told me to stay calm and call the cops again and give our address for further explanation. The cops did end up coming to my house and I was being questioned for about half an hour before they finally left. The police never did find out who that little girl was or where she was calling from, as it would have been very difficult to trace, but they did all they could. My heart aches for that child, and I hope she's doing alright. But I still have my doubts about that.
My parents divorced when I was in the 8th grade, and after my dad moved out, my mum was single, so she often left me home alone. I would usually have someone stay the night on nights I knew my mum wasn't coming home, so I wasn't totally alone. So one night, my friend and I, who I'll call Jessie for the story, was staying the night, and for some reason we had the best internet connection in the garage, so we were in there just messing around on MySpace and such, and we started hearing what sounded like 2 people talking. Jessie and I stopped talking and were trying to hear what the people were saying. We got up and stood by the garage door, but we still couldn't make it out, so we went inside and looked through the peephole on my front door. There were 2 men standing in my driveway by my garage, looking around. I immediately freaked out because they weren't standing on the sidewalk or anything, they were standing by my garage like they lived at my house. I stood there watching them for a minute before one of them started walking up to the door. I quickly, but very quietly, checked to make sure both locks were locked, and then looked back out the peephole. The man was leaning over the side railing on the porch, trying to look into my mum's bedroom window. I instantly signaled to Jessie to go get knives and be super quiet. I looked back outside and the 2 men were back by the garage talking. Jessie asked what had happened, and I just told her to go make sure the doors were locked while I kept watch. She kept watch while I looked for the house phone. This was before it was the norm for young teens to have cell phones. All of a sudden she says, "They're leaving." My heart sank because something in my gut just told me they weren't. Without even thinking, I asked her, "Did you lock the side door in the garage?" And she said she didn't. I took off through the kitchen into the garage as I heard our side gate open. I made it to the door and locked the deadbolt before I could get the doorknob lock, and as soon as I flipped the lock, the doorknob twisted. I thought I was gonna puke. I grabbed the handle and locked it before running back inside and locking the garage door. I ran to the back door and at that point just started yelling, "Lock the windows!" My back door had these sheer curtains over them, where you were still able to see inside and outside, and before I was able to make it to lock the door, I saw someone walk up the back porch. I jumped behind the couch and watched as he tried to open the back door, before the second guy followed. Jessie came walking into the living room, and I grabbed her and pulled her down behind the couch with me. We both just sat there in silence, terrified, watching these two guys try and figure out how to get in. I started to cry, and Jessie was just sitting there shaking. After what seemed like forever, they walked off the back porch and into the backyard. We heard them banging around before we saw them walk back by the porch and out the side gate. I ran to the front and looked through the peephole again and saw them walk across the street and get into a car. I told Jessie they were gone, and we both burst into tears and started hugging each other. We called her aunt and she came and picked us up and took us to her house, where we stayed the night there. We never told anyone because we thought we would be in trouble for some reason. But after that, I didn't stay home alone for years, and even at 25, I still get scared when it's just my daughter and I, home alone while my husband is at work, or the rare occasion when he goes out with friends. We're lucky it didn't end worse than it did, but I'm still scarred from it 12 years later.